morning. I'm really happy that a lot of you made it here. We're going to start with this first presentation of our Method Schools of Fall 2025. So today I have the honor to present to all of you both two great researchers. First, I'm gonna introduce Dr. Sol Cárdenas. She holds a PhD in political and social sciences with a specialization in political science, as well as a master's degree in political and social studies and bachelor degree in political science and public administration. Also, with a specialization in political science, she earned all her degrees with honors from our beloved university, National Autonomous University of Mexico. She is in level 1 of national researchers in the national system, and she currently serves as a full-time associate professor at the Center of Political Studies in the Faculty of Political and Social Sciences at UNAM. So I will welcome the Dr. Sol. Thank you so much. She will start introducing this book, and after that I will introduce our main author, the Dr. Celina as well. Go ahead, Dr. Sol.
Thank you. Hello and good morning. I'm very happy to be here with Celina Su, the author of the book entitled Budget, Justice, Solidarities, and Politics. I want to start by saying that this book is organized in 3 parts, but before speaking about them, I would like to say that it was interesting to me that the author in the prologue tells her family's story. They moved to the United States from Brazil in the late 80s and started living in New York City. She says, I learned to respect authority, but also that official narratives could not always be trusted. For everyone in my family, the long-standing formula for financial security felt increasingly difficult to follow. I had received a lot of lessons about self-reliance and interpersonal kindness, and Republicans versus Democrats, but I had little exposure to unions, community organizing, worker cooperatives, coordinated mutual aid, or different forms of collective action. And maybe too, wait. Something happened here in my computer. Give me a minute. I don't know what happened. Yeah, ready, I'm sorry. Republicans versus Democrats, but I had little exposure to unions, community organizing, worker cooperative, coordinated mutual aid, or different forms of collective action. And maybe too, I had inherited a distrust of institutional politics and desire for politics in another form. I was familiar with the consequences of racist tropes on an individual level, yet I realized that I had not sufficiently thought about their consequences on a policy level. They showed me in deeply personal ways how race and class cannot be separated out as variables, and how they color not just my life, but every social and economic institution around me as well. How did popular understandings of Asian Americans' deservingness shape food assistance, school funding, and parks planning, I wonder? What was the role of Asian Americanness, however characterized, in justifying current public policies, whether for or against supposed welfare queens or anchor babies? Interdisciplinary scholar Lisa Lowe details how the life condition, choices, and expressions of Asian Americans have been significantly determined by the U.S. state through immigration policies, enfranchisement, and processes of citizenship. Asian Americans have not failed to properly assimilate. Rather, they have succeeded in playing their roles as the foreign within. It was in summer 2020 that I started thinking about budget justice, as an especially helpful framing for conversations about racial justice, democracy, and political economy, not as separate issues, but as inextricably intertwined ones. She explains the different effects that COVID-19 had on different groups in the United States, from the native nations to the increase in police violence in neighborhoods. Then, President Trump weaponized the fact that the COVID-19 virus was first identified in Wuhan, China, by nicknaming it the China virus. As the virus spread across the United States, Asian Americans reported a surge in racially motivated acts of violence. Continuing with her ideas, I'll quote her. I share these personal anecdotes not as data, but rather as glimpses into how I came to formulate the questions that animate this book. The messiness of my story in my schooling, sense of socioeconomic mobility or immobility vis-a-vis personal and public budgets, and relationship to different forms of political organizing and expression met the complexity of events since 2020 to prompt new examinations on the road to budget justice. It galvanized me to oppose austerity as default policy, to work to disrupt racial hierarchies embedded in public policies, and to enable all of us to become political members of our communities. For this, I am convinced that we must democratize how budgets get made by organizing everyday citizens and building coalitions, and attempts to salvage or nurture our democracy and its institutions must, in turn, address not only growing political polarization, but also growing economic inequalities, moving beyond experiments promoting civil discourse, deliberation, or inclusion to shape our political economy. As I said before, the book is structured in 3 parts that can be summarized in the author's words in this way. Budget justice requires a new sort of democracy that emphasizes 3 points of analysis and practice. First, budgets are moral documents that make explicit what communities choose to divest from and invest in. Second, direct democracy must engage everyday constituents rather than elected representatives in a range of decision-making, conversation, and actions about collective needs. And third, in turn, city residents must themselves practice new modes of citizenship as neighbors as opposed to individual consumers or members of voting blocs. Together, these practices will help communities to imagine, articulate, and forward truly different public policies, not just bandages to make the status quo a bit more tolerable. Although the book focuses on New York City, the author presents in each of the 3 parts of the book interviews conducted with activists and thinkers in other cities. In part 1, Jackson, Mississippi. In part 2, Porto Alegre. In part 3, Barcelona. Part 1, Opacity Abets Austerity, is composed of 5 chapters. 1, Moral Documents. 2, Flip the Gaze. 3, Follow the Money. 4, Austerity for Profit. 5, A Right to the City Budget, and an interlude, an interview with Makani Temba. In these 3 chapters, she considers some of the basic makings of budget injustice, arguing that budgets are designed to be anti-democratic and discourage public accountability or dissent. From her point of view, budgets as moral documents reveal policymakers' austerity as a political choice rather than necessary sacrifice. In her words, without democratic accountability, it becomes impossible to differentiate prudent budget cuts from austerity as policy. A one-size-fits-all approach for public budgets, even when cost-cutting might backfire and undermine effectiveness. When are budget cuts truly necessary? When are they smart moves, and when might they seriously undermine everyday residents' ability to live and thrive? Because of this, budget justice requires communities to flip the glaze. In other words, quoting the author, flipping the gaze and delineating histories of the present are crucial to showing that cities did not naturally evolve to be segregated and unequal. And as poet and scholar Claire Schwartz writes, the past is only the past because the present needs somewhere to point its crooked finger. Budget justice demands what sociologist Henry Lefebvre articulated as a right to the city, not only to access opportunities for the good life, but help make the decisions that make it so. The ends of budget justice will not be achieved without a change in means. Part 2. Democracy is a daily practice is a structure of 5 chapters. 6. No taxation without participation. An interlude, an interview with Tarson Núñez. 7. An invitation to participatory budgeting. 8. Terms of deliberation. 9. Actionable knowledges. And 10. No algorithms, no shortcuts. In these chapters, she studies how everyday citizens might begin to combat budget opacity and inform how local public funds get spent. In this part, she uses a term called ecosystem of participation. Quoting her, I use the term ecosystem of participation partly to emphasize that democracies cannot live on any single set of institutions. Likewise, democratic politics need diversity to stay alive. Ecosystems of participation for budget justice must be enlivened by a new ecology of citizenship. How might citizens engage each other and different spaces of political action in more productive ways? Her book focuses on formations of grassroots politics taking place in everyday library meeting rooms, church basements, and on the streets, instead of formal chambers of power like Congress or City Hall. For her, it's important to also focus on power more than on institutional design. Part 3, Citizens Make Cities, is composed of 4 chapters. 11. Neighborly Citizenship. 12. Inventive Solidarities. 13. Budget Lines of Desire. And an interlude, an interview with Marc Serra Solé. And 14. Insurgent Budgeting. In this part, she mentions insurgent budgeting. She proposed that when even in a limited public budget process, citizens can sometimes take logics from invented spaces and sneak them into public as an invented space. Residents then pursue and realize policies that governments would not have enacted otherwise. The book ends with an epilogue and acknowledgments. In the epilogue, she reminds us to focus less on current administrations and more on the structural injustices. She also mentions the importance of studying the local level and how democratic experiences and politics incubated in cities can, when networked, echo nationwide and worldwide. One of the book's greatest virtues is that the author's approach first to the differentiated effects of the institutional design of the public budget, but above all, to the power relations that lie behind the definition of these budgets. In other words, they seem to be technical issues when they respond to the logic of interest groups, and in most cases, the differentiated effects they will have on the population are not considered. I would like to reiterate that I agree with the author that austerity will never be the solution to the distribution of resources, as they should be based on the needs of the population, and as she rightly points out, there are groups that face a wide variety of oppressions, such as social class, gender, and race. In this sense, institutional design and distribution should always consider the material conditions of people, and that is the political responsibility of the state to improve people's living conditions and social well-being, and not to design for the benefit of a few. Among the elements I found central to the book is how it successfully conveys the important consequences of the processes of discussion and community building when discussing participatory budgeting, because they go beyond the purely electoral logic of simply casting a vote. Here it is relevant to talk about political and collective action and our right to the city. This, as I noted, allows for the building of community, dialogue, solidarity, empathy, deliberation, and the recovery of public space, which, with the neoliberal process, has led to the privatization of public space and gentrification. I found several concepts extremely interesting. Budget justice as a democratic practice, and democratic practice as collective play, budget injustice, ecosystems of participation, and ecosystems of citizenship framing. I won't dwell on them here because I'd love for you to read them in the book. I also want to share with you that overall, the book writing is accessible. It presents very complex arguments, yet anyone can read it. I must acknowledge that each statement in the book is supported by hard data and solid, rigorous information that effectively supports each of the ideas presented. I think that ultimately it raises interesting arguments in the fields of political science and public administration. I would like to bring my participation to a close by thanking Dr. Carla Valverde, coordinator of Political and Social Sciences program, for the invitation, and of course, by congratulating the author on this achievement. In the author's words, cities are the crucial contested sites where austerity policies first hit the ground, where citizens gather to rise up in response, and from which entire communities might look across borders to ask and learn from one another by answering, what is to be done? Can communities hold enough political power to hold sway after the next election? Will processes like public budget exist, and will they be implemented in ways that hold public budgets accountable and center the needs of everyday residents? Will residents' lives feel less precarious? Will their life savings and livelihoods not be at the mercy of the next recession, epidemic, or wildfire or hurricane? Communities can only achieve budget justice by combining seemingly disparate forms of resistance and care in strategic ways, with a clear eye on the long game. Protests and elections are not enough. Budget justice requires collective reworkings of nodes in ecosystems of participations and ecologies of citizenships in ways that help everyday residents to understand what precisely is happening in the public budgets, and to reimagine what policies should look like in response, harnessed and sustained through organized initiatives that accrue political power. In so doing, communities conceptualize democracy not as a set of institutions, but rather as a set of practices and situated solidarities. And that will be all from me, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sol, for your participation. I think this is a book that everyone should read once in her life, because it has a lot of common problematics that we all have happened in our life. So right now I'm going to introduce you the author of this book, the Dr. Celina Su. She holds a PhD in urban studies from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the MIT. She currently serves as a professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences, Political Science, Psychology, Urban Education, and African American Racial and Ethnic Studies at the City University of New York Graduate Center. Her research interests include participatory and deliberative democracy, civic engagement and political participation, community development, urban policy and decision-making, civil society, especially grassroots organizations, and public policy, especially for social policy. Celina Su is the inaugural Marilyn G. Glitter Chair in the Urban Studies at the City University of New York Graduate Center, as well as a professor of political science at Brooklyn College. Her scholarly, pedagogical, and creative work centers on everyday struggles for collective governance, centering economic democracy and racial justice. Please welcome the Dr. Celina Su. Thank you so much for being here. And well, it's a pleasure to have you. Go on, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you, Jacqueline, for that introduction. Thank you, Dr. Sol, for just your discussion of the book. I feel like you emphasized exactly the points that I really wanted to share, and I feel really honored and humbled to be in conversation with you all. I'm very curious to hear what resonates and what does not, and to just compare notes. And I'm sorry that my Spanish is not strong enough to speak in Spanish with you. If I may, Jacqueline, I just sent a request to share. Oh, okay. Now I can share. Okay. So if it's okay, I would like to, share slides. Okay. So thank you so much for being with me today. And thank you to Dr. Carla as well for the invitation. And as Dr. Soul mentioned, I started the book with some personal anecdotes, and one of them is about something that's been happening in the United States for me every September, which is announcements of new budget cuts to the public schools. So partly in order to make the book accessible, I forwarded my positionality and my role as a public school parent in a way that I would not have anticipated even a few years ago. So I sort of start the book, for instance, with talking about how I heard that there are going to be $370 million cut from New York City schools. And here are a couple of examples of the sorts of newspaper headlines that were happening at the time. Just planned budget cuts to different agencies on the left, and on the right, specifically the budget cuts were hitting different agencies in the city budget, and the mayor blames quote unquote migrants, asylum seekers arriving in New York. And I was just wondering, what's up with 370 million? How come the city accountant called the city controller was saying it was actually more? 420 something million. These are huge numbers. What's going on? I'm someone who studied public policy, and yet I feel quite bewildered. So that's one starting point for thinking about public budgets. And I will just say that as I was writing the book, I had to really restrain myself from trying to read too much of the peer-reviewed public finance and public administration literature to remember, like, it's not every citizen's fault. And I use the word citizen with a small c. I don't know which way my hands are going. It does not matter what passport one holds. It's small c, as in just someone who is not an elected official in community. And I first thought about all of these issues as Dr. Soul mentioned, during the 2020 protests and uprisings in the United States and around the world. That's when I saw the term budget justice in popular discourse, because to me it sounds a little bit technocratic, and I'm not the only person, I think, who's intimidated by public budgets. And I saw it on a lot of signs during the 2020 protests. And at the same time, there was the COVID-19 pandemic, which really helped to crystallize a lot of the social inequalities around us. And the picture on the left is a picture that is in the book. And it's just one picture that for an elected official who ran against someone with a lot more money in Los Angeles and won with these sorts of billboards. So clearly, how our cities spend money was a topic of public debate at the time. And this made me really wonder, what would our cities look like if we centered the needs of those who make our cities, make them livable, and help them to just work every day? Butchers, grocers, construction workers, bus drivers, school teachers. Here, at least, gentrification and displacement and affordability are huge crises that are happening in our cities. So there's a North American children's book classic called What Do People Do All Day? So this already happens in children's books, but what might it look like to try to do this in real life? And in the United States, it feels impossible to think about these questions without also thinking about the legacy of redlining. So this is something that the United States federal government did in the 1930s. So it's inscribed into law and history. And this is the part that forced me to think about histories of what Michel Foucault calls histories of the present. So this is an actual map from the 1930s. And basically the lines, the spaces in red are exactly those spaces that had any immigrants or any Black people. And those were considered ineligible for government-backed mortgages, which starts a vicious cycle of disinvestment that we still see today. So across the country, these maps from 100 years ago still reflect inequalities that we see today. So, for example, these are the redlined neighborhoods from another city, a medium-sized city in the United States called Richmond in Virginia. And this is where nobody could get decent loans because residents were Black. And this is where now in 2023, I think this map was published 2 years ago, there are no parks or trees. So these are the exact same neighborhoods where during heat waves, because of climate change today, people are more likely to die from heat. So this is just one concrete example among so many of us thinking about how we how we need to think about the past as well when we think about budget justice. It's not just about this year's budget and austerity. So in this example, I'll just say that heat waves in the United States kill as many as 12,000 Americans each year. And each degree, and here I'm talking about Fahrenheit, so for Celsius, you have to more than double it, increases the risk of death by 2.5%. So how can communities work towards budget justice, getting the resources and power we need to address our needs and build cities in which we can all thrive? And one step would be to quote unquote flip the gaze. And I don't think there's a good translation for the gaze. This is borrowing from art history, maybe La Mirada, like who gets to look at whom is a question here. And here's a really ugly excerpt from the 530-page New York City budget. And just to show you how hard it is to flip the gaze and see even where our city spends its money. As you can see, this looks like it's from a dot matrix printer. It's not something that can be put in a spreadsheet very easily. And but I spent some time looking at these sorts of documents, and it just became obvious that a lot of the data is missing. We can't look at, we can't really figure out what's happening. And we can't make calculations very easily. So I don't actually want you to read this document. I just want you to see it, see a snippet of it to imagine what it would feel like to try to be someone who says, I want to think about where my city spends its money and look at 530 pages of something like this. I'll show you one more snippet, and this is just regarding the police department in New York City. And I'll just say that for some reason, when I looked at it, there were allocations for the housing police, which received $205 million. I think this was in 23. Oh, sorry. And they were proposing around the same in 24. But then there were new lines for over $1 billion. Where does it come from? $1 billion is a lot of money. And this is supposed to be government transparency. And here's the kind of graphic that maybe would be more helpful. This one is from Los Angeles. Where does our money come from and where does it go? But the Los Angeles one is missing its entire education budget because that's by county instead of city for some reason. So just basically, even though I use New York as the specific case, this problem of not letting the residents have a good sense of how budgets are spent is not specific to New York or Los Angeles. It's all over. And here are a couple glances at just the fact that, at least in New York, the police department tends to have a lot more in expenditures than other agencies like parks or libraries, or youth or children's services or homeless services. And one particular aspect that gets a little bit more attention is overtime. That's what the OT stands for. So in 2023, the New York Police Department spent more than $700 million past its budget in just overtime. And one more aspect to just emphasize, is that these sorts of numbers made me think increasingly that this is not just about me not being smart enough or me not doing enough preparatory work to understand city budgets, that these budgets are presented as technical, neutral documents in a way to intimidate citizens as an anti-democratic move. And I just wanted to share that in New York, a lot of the budgeting powers shifted from the city to the state of New York after 1975 during the fiscal crisis. And during the 1975 fiscal crisis, the state made a new board called the Emergency Financial Control Board that shifted a lot of budget decision-making powers from local elected officials to governor-appointed officials in a state entity. And a few years later, it removed the word emergency from the Emergency Financial Control Board. And so if we dig, we see a lot of examples like this also. So one major theme that I hear across American cities in the US is that of what political scientists here call preemption or lack of home rule, that we can't really make our own rules. So I think that last year maybe, or this past year, one common trend of preemption is a lot of anti-sanctuary city laws around the country. So just not letting cities make their own rules. And all of this made me want to think more about how even if we had decent budget documents that looked pretty and were color-coded and were much more legible than those awful 530 pages, we still need also democratic control. And I just want to put the USA in context that compared to a lot of other, especially high-income nations, the US has low voter turnout rates. I'll just say that. And I'll also mention that a big chunk of our electorate is missing because we have such high incarceration rates, and a lot of people are not allowed to vote even after they have served their prison sentences. This varies by state because of our federalist system, but basically it's really hard to make sure that the people actually get a voice in informing the policies that they have to live by. And we also know that at least in the US, some people get far less attention because of the electoral system, and we're constantly redrawing district lines, etc. And just to make it explicit, when I used the Guardian newspaper interactive to estimate the percentage chance that my vote would make a difference in the last presidential election, the answer I got was 0. So I could still try to vote to get counted in the popular vote, but it's not hard to understand why Americans are very disenchanted with the liberal representative system. There was a study that got a lot of attention by Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page that analyzed 1,799 congressional policy decisions and compared them to public opinion polls, and they saw that the average American's influence on public policy is near 0. So I started to increasingly pay attention to what happens between elections and between protests. And so these are some books from my bookshelf that is sort of gives you a glance at the literature on participatory democracy. And I ended up really focusing on participatory budgeting because for a while it was the experiment, the participatory democratic experiment that was getting a lot of attention. You may know some of the history, but it started in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989 and traveled around Latin America through the 1990s and then around the world. And in Brazil, cities with participatory budgeting, or PB, collected 30% more in taxes, developed more civil society organizations than those without PB, and boasted of impressive results like lowering infant mortality. But then a key question has been, what happens when it travels around the world? So I was really interested in what it could do to help people better inform local budgets in New York. So here's the New York process. In the Northern Hemisphere autumn right now, people are getting together in assemblies to generate ideas. Over the winter, there's some volunteers who help to develop the main proposals. In the spring, there are folks who vote, and then the projects with the most votes get funded. And I'll just say that in terms of some highlights of the New York process, it grew for a while, and then it's now has been on a plateau since 2020. But at least for the first few years, it grew to by district to be represented in around half of New York City districts. And in terms of who participates, when we surveyed around 51,000 participants, nearly 60% identified as people of color. 30% or 1/3 reported household incomes of 25,000 or less, which is low. Around 1/4, 1 out of 4 said that they were not eligible to vote in regular elections. And I could talk more about details, but to me, that was interesting. So we're not just reaching folks who typically vote. But then increasingly, a question became, great, we're helping people participate, but what are they really participating in? Is it meaningful? And at first, they focused foremost on what they believed families, neighbors, and neighborhoods needed most. But very quickly, they shifted to what is eligible, feasible, and reasonable. So to one delegate, for instance, said that the process didn't progress anywhere. It's just people debating and speaking about minor things like traffic lights or garbage pails. It wasn't progressive. And this made me also interview a lot of the city government workers for all of the different city agencies involved, and said things like, we'll work with what's feasible, with what is already within the framework of the types of projects we already fund. So this raises the question of what gets to be defined as a good project, and by extension, a good citizen. Whose culture has capital? And two of the areas that this stood out the most were first in education, where this is a screenshot from a new nonprofit that one person I interviewed founded. And this person was the president of a parent-teacher organization at a very rich school. The parents raised $2 million a year amongst themselves. Some New York City schools raised $10,000 a year amongst themselves. And she was really upset that the local parents were trying to dominate the local PB process. So she quit and got some money to create a new nonprofit that ties low-income schools to funding channels. But this question of who gets to dominate the process and who has the social and cultural capital came up there. And then the other area that was really interesting to me was regarding police surveillance cameras. Why, when there's so many protests in the streets against police brutality at the same time, were police cameras so popular? And when I talked to people about this idea, they said that they had much greater visions of community safety, and everything else fell by the wayside and ended up leaving just this. And over time, we saw city agencies take over the process and try to make it about austerity and consumer choice. So in this screen, in the lower right over here, you see that some city agencies started to say, they would show up at assemblies, and instead of saying, "What do you need?" they started saying, "Oh, we did research, and here are 5 projects that we started, and they're so amazing, and we almost finished them, but then we had budget cuts. Could you vote for this so that you could get real impact for your dollar and help us make up for austerity?" And then other city agencies started doing that also to contain the message. I've been talking for a long time, so I feel like I should wrap up a little bit, but here's one social media post that made me really sad. On the left, "Every year participatory budgeting makes me die a little inside." Basically, we're putting different necessities against each other. And at the same time, this made me want to look at when were things a little bit different. So because the process has been so limited, I really paid attention to spillover effects. And when things led to another, like the PTA, like the Parent Teacher Association president's new nonprofit, or people trying to do things in interesting ways. So these are lines of desire in architecture, and these are lines or paths that run contrary to governmental design or planning. So there's a line by someone named Antonio Machado who wrote, "Se hace camino al andar," you make the way by walking. And it takes as few as 15 passages over time to create a new trail. So I try to look for these sorts of lines of desire in the PB budgets. And so one example would be this one by 10 and 11-year-olds. They asked for explicitly 5 water filling stations and 5 bathroom stalls because bathroom repairs are very common. But they did it in a very sneaky way or quiet way to make them all gender bathrooms. And so that's just one example of how they were trying to make their own project and their new own institution rather than just getting more funds for existing projects. So this made me think about the larger ecosystem of participation. So using Andrea Cornwall's categorization of invited spaces started by government and invented spaces invented by people outside of government. Some of the most interesting projects were ones that were first developed in the solidarity economy or other invented spaces, and then they snuck them in into participatory budgeting and other ways in order to get state resources for them. So I'll just say that at least in the US right now, so many of our policies are set up to help us compete against each other and not to work together. Like, we're all academics here, just even how student fellowships are allocated, who gets the faculty line. Like, we have to talk about how we overcame these struggles and how we're better and than the other person when we all deserve funding for graduate school if we can make it in. And so just that a lot of this is also a challenge of the popular imagination, that at least in the US, we know how to privatize, but we don't know how to make things public, like maybe commoning, en común, but like that's not a popular word in English. And to publicize is not the right word. So, in the book, I mentioned that even for my kids' kindergarten class, I was supposed to choose between 12 schools. I was supposed to write down 12 schools like a consumer. And I couldn't just get her to automatically go to a local school and work hard with my neighbors to make it a good school. So there's a lot built in changing our habits as citizens also, as well as changing the institutions. And I'll just say one last note that this is although I focus on New York, this is around the United States. So one interesting example is from Nashville, Tennessee, that they've been hosting a lot of what they call radical proposal writing parties, that maybe the process is small and has been co-opted, but they can try to reclaim it by trying to really sneak in radical proposals. Okay, I've talked for too long. I wanted to share a couple questions and I'll stop. What would a fully funded city look like to you? How can we hold our governments and public budgets accountable? How do we get the power we need for this? And then a couple of questions for us as scholars. How do we as scholars help to organize our neighbors or people outside of academia around these sorts of issues if they speak to you? And what are our responsibilities and strengths as scholars in these efforts? Thank you so much. I wanted to also just share that if you are interested in the book, there's a discount code for 30% off of that. I can share with Jacqueline later if that's helpful, but I'll stop talking. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
No problem. We are really happy to hear you, and it was just wow, amazing that we in the everyday life always think about the government as a huge thing, like something really far from us. But communities must do their job, And I think that your book is just this invitation to all of us to make part of this change and to be like not to be the police, but to be aware of what they are doing with our taxes. So I think it's really brilliant the work that you have done, Doctor, and I am really glad that you share with us some of the ideas and some of the roadmap that brought you to all this book. So thank you so much. Dr. Sol, I don't know if you have any additional comment.
Yes, I will be brief. First, recognize Celine's presentation and her book. I really love it. I would like to say that it's amazing how the greater the oppressions are, less money, when it should be completely and absolutely the opposite. I think we need to really question the neoliberal, patriarchal, and colonial system. As I said, we need to talk about political and collective action and our right to the city. We need to continue building community, dialogue, solidarity, empathy, deliberation, and the recovery of the public space, which, with the neoliberal process, has led to the privatization of public space and gentrification. And I think that the state should be responsible for the well being of the population, but we know it doesn't work that way. That's why, as academics, we should question this, but also as citizens. Definitely, we need to pressure and organize to make the state accountable.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much for those thoughts. And especially this notion of the state, because I don't know what it was like in Mexico at the time, but especially during the COVID-19 epidemic, because there's been so much state oppression, there's also discourse on how to make the state a contested space rather than just turn completely away towards anarchist or other mutual aid or other movements. And while those are very helpful in terms of principles, there are also questions of whether they let the state just drop its responsibilities as a welfare state and ends up being poor people helping poor people. But we also, it's hard. We are, yeah. I mean, even my 7-year-old kid is very conflicted about the police and has heard about and is scared of immigration officials. The fact that the state is primarily experienced as a police state is also a huge issue.
Yes, doctor. Thank you so much. I'm gonna open the mic to anyone in the room who wants to make a comment or a question, but I do have a question. And this is in our context, so please feel free if you have any more ideas. We can totally share it. How can we get into this budget justice when transparency is not clear, when the red tape it seems so like unfinished that you as a citizen, even when you have the knowledge of how it can work, it doesn't work. So how can we get to that?
Should I try to answer or
Yeah, please.
okay. Wow, that's a huge question. I think that so your question was about the opacity, lack of transparency. Yeah. I think that at least I can talk to you a little bit about the USA experience that there are increasing efforts to try to make budgets at least more transparent, even to other elected officials. And it depends a lot on the exact administration of the city. So older cities like New York are different from newer cities in California in the US Southwest. But we tend to be strong mayor places where we're trying to get really basic things done, like getting the city agencies to share their numbers with other city council members. But I will also say that beyond transparency, it's also really about forming power, because I'll say that I've been working with more outsider groups, fighting for a better budget in New York for the past couple of years, less involvement in PB here. And some of the folks who voted against a recent budget that was really bad lost their important committee seats on city council because they stood with the more progressive stance. So unless people also organize to back up that official, it's really going to be hard to really hold the mayor and other people with power accountable. But I'd be curious regarding your wisdom and your experiences there also, because that's going to be actually a big issue for us in November, because for the past few years, we've had a really awful mayor named Eric Adams. I don't know if you've heard of it. He's easy to make fun of because he took bribes for vacations to Turkey. He keeps cutting budgets, etc. He's easy to villainize, to render a villain. Our new one coming in is more progressive, Zoran Mamdani. And our movement groups are also wondering, how do we hold a more progressive mayor accountable? They need to help. They need to both help Mamdani succeed and hold him accountable. Because there have been mayors before who said that they were going to help people, and then they still take money from real estate, or they still increase the police budget more than education or childcare or other budgets. And I will say one more thing I wanted to emphasize is that last bit on competition, that a big part of transparency and the power in answering your question, Jacqueline, it might be to just figure out how different groups can stand united. Even this coalition I have been working with for the past 2 years, at least in New York, a lot of the groups organized by policy, the housing people for affordable housing, the childcare people, the libraries people. And it's very hard to help everyone work together towards the common good, rather than let me get some crumbs of the pie. At least in English, we use the pizza pie a lot as a metaphor for budgets, that we're all fighting for tiny bits instead of asking for a bigger pie.
Yes, totally. Thank you so much. Dr. Sol, Copelia, I'm gonna give you the word in 1 second.
Dr. Celine, listening to you and thinking about Mexico, for example, we have like a big problem here because 9 women are killed every day for being women. So I was thinking about your concept about budget injustice. Like I said, every year there is less budget for attending this problem in Mexico. So I don't know, this makes me realize what we were talking about, more oppression, less budget. So I was also thinking about the state. What should the state do, and what should we do? That would be like my question.
Thank you for raising that question because it really brings up some tensions that even in a very different iteration, I really see here also. I'll just say that year after year, I do not know the latest statistics, but when I last looked a few years ago, it had been this way for decades. Half of all femicides in New York City are by their intimate partners. So one thing, and in the meantime, elected officials continue to talk about certain crimes and not others for more police budgets of some sorts, and not others. So one would be to fight for more funds, and this happens on so many different levels. One of the huge problems with participatory budgeting as it has been implemented in the US is that it has sidelined questions of where money comes from and taxes, so that it ends up being just about how to allocate small pots of money. But at its best, it can say, this is our priority. And this is the beginning. This is the entry point. So I do think we need more entry points for people to get to assert this as their priority. But the femicide instance also shows that it's about more money and attention and power, but also how it's used and how it's implemented. Because the New York City Police Department does not have a good track record regarding domestic violence and femicide. It has to also be about structural changes regarding social workers, regarding cultural changes, and other aspects also. So that's a really good issue for us to think about, how we need more money and we also need cultural social shifts and a different imagination.
Yes, totally. And also, Dr. Sol says, and who decides priorities? Yeah, I think that we should raise and aware that we as a community, we can raise the priorities of this. And it's not a minor problem in our society.
No, and the imagination question shows that it's not that that's a very difficult question. I just came from a conference this weekend with a lot of organizers from different parts of the country talking about the policing question. And they were talking about some of the, most of these were African American organizers, and they were talking about how a lot of folks within their communities also go towards the most visible, most well-known answer, which is cops and police, even when the organizer said, oh, so did the police fix your window when it was broken? Oh, no? So who fixed it? Was it your neighbors? And what would be helpful? But they don't, but there's still, even to figure out the community priorities, there's still work on figuring out a common language, vocabulary, shared analysis. And I'll just say that the movement groups I work with are sometimes scared of that too, because they're like, what if I just talk to people and they're just racist? I can't talk to them. And some people will be, but we also, in order to build power, we also need to do that. So it's hard.
It's hard, but it's something that it has to be done. So yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. I'm gonna give the voice to Copelia Menendez. Copelia, go ahead.
Okay, so can you hear me right?
Yes.
I was wondering, it seems that part of the problem is what counts as federal, state, or county or city budget. So what are the different problems that these levels bring and how can we face them? Like, I understand that local might be better in some cases because citizen participation might be easier. But for example, with the closure of the Department of Education, schooling now depends on local governments, and that brings questions regarding the quality of the schooling and the subjects that are allowed. And I'm also wondering if taxing the rich might be a pertinent bit of, like subject when talking about budgets, because I guess it's not only about how we spend the budget, but where it's actually coming from.
Those are great questions. So yeah, I am not an expert on US federalism, but I will say that the local is both a potential source of strength in this case, and it's a curse. Because for the past few decades, for at least 50 years or so, there has been less and less federal funding to localities in the U.S. Ronald Reagan ended certain legislation, and so we both have, and there's always this tension between asserting the power of the local and fighting for home rule and fighting for coordination and assistance from the national level. So for the most part, a lot of education funds already come, unfortunately, from property taxes, which are very regressive. So rich neighborhoods get good schools and poor neighborhoods do not. And it's very difficult to get resource sharing rather than resource hoarding. So I'll say that. But then the federal cuts are making a huge difference in terms of curriculum, etc. But also, like, just in the Bronx, which is a lower income borough out of 5 in New York City, we're expecting 30,000 jobs lost just from the cuts to the health care program Medicaid, because we're foreseeing public hospitals that rely on payments for low income patients to close. So this is something that a lot of cities are facing right now. And one thing that's interesting is that at least in some cities, they're seeing some local groups that have a little bit more power be willing to join coalitions now, because, like, for example, labor unions in the United States can be quite progressive or just very centrist, like fighting for the wages of their own members, but not the overall budget. But now that they're foreseeing cuts, they see that they really have to stick together. And the other problem here is that it varies a lot. We are super federalist, so it varies a lot by state and city. So one recent proposal was to install what are called pilots, PILOTS, and pilots are acronyms for payments in lieu of taxes, because universities and hospitals are nonprofits and don't pay taxes. And in the meantime, at least in New York City, Columbia University, New York University, a lot of hospitals are more real estate empires than universities right now. They just Columbia owns more land than anybody else in Manhattan, and they don't pay any taxes. So there's a citywide student union of high school students and university students saying Columbia and NYU should pay pilots to the public university system that I work for instance. But that's a state power, not a city power. Cities just can't tax the rich that easily. They can only implement user fees and other things that really feel regressive and don't have as much political popular support. So it's a tough situation. Yeah. Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you, Copilia. I'm gonna give the voice to Daniel Lara. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Sorry if my English is not so good, but I try to communicate myself with clarity. I'm concerned about sustainability, and I want to know if budget justice is or how is related with sustainability in the context of neoliberalism model. What do you think about this matter?
Sustainability in terms of, could you say a tiny bit more, please?
Sustainability in a state of civilizatory model against the neoliberalism, because the neoliberalism model is in crisis, ecological crisis, political crisis, economical crisis, and I want to know if both budget justice is or can be a part of a new model, a sustainable model. I don't know if you have some information about this.
Sure. I would say that I hope that it does speak to that that in some ways the three parts of the book about budgets, democratic institutions, and citizen habits all also follow how they have manifest themselves in the neoliberal age in terms of emphasizing what in the United States we call new public management and public administration, treating residents as consumers and relying on a good governance technocratic model that really just emphasizes austerity as the only answer, that emphasizes votes, and that emphasizes citizen habits and what the political theorist Wendy Brown calls homo economicus, that that we have been trained as everyday folks to learn how to work hard in order to hopefully make a living, even though it's getting very difficult, and not to work with one another for solidarity or democratic power. And just even saying that things have to be contested. These are moral documents and these are sites of contestation and political struggle and not technocratic benchmarks to be met. If in some ways it feels so basic, but in other ways it feels like this is part of the big fight regarding fighting neoliberalism. It's just so pervasive, and we have to really identify it and counter it in so many different domains of life. And so, and that's why I'm trying to write this book in a hopefully slightly less academic way, so that for people like other middle class parents at my kids' school, and they did say to me, yeah, I want to do something a little bit more than fundraise for my kids' school, but I don't know what to do. And they haven't thought of it this way. And they're like, oh, you mean the budget cuts are partly a political choice? Does that mean that we have tons of money? No, we don't have tons of money, but it's still a political choice when there's still so many luxury condos going up and luxury apartments are not should not be the only definition of growth. Just again and again, every part has to be contested. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel, and your English is okay, so no worries. Now I'm gonna give the voice to Angela Rojas. You're here in the Unidad de Posgrado. Cool. Go ahead.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Hi, Dr. Su. Thank you for your presentation. I just want to say that I really felt that social media post that you show on your presentation, because here in Mexico City, we had our voting for budget participatory budget, like a month ago. And in my neighborhood, the project that won was paving streets. So, and only for 14 votes. So it was very sad, because there were other kind of projects that, in my opinion, were better, and focus on, I don't know, plan, more green areas, or better areas for children, or things like that. And paving the street one, like every year, sorry. So it's very sad for this budget to go to this area, and the major office has the responsibility to do that in other offices. So your presentation gave me like a lot of ideas, because you only need to organize in your neighbor like 20 other people, and if you have a really high chance to won that budget due to the low participation in these votings. So even I can't vote because I am an immigrant here in Mexico, your presentation gave me ideas of participate anyway in this kind of budget, because I live here. I enjoy and suffer some of the difficulties of the city and of the neighborhood. So thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting.
Thank you so much. I will say that that's one of the parts of participatory budgeting that both depresses me, and how small it is, and how it's like for things that should be done anyway, and is also at the same time inspiring, that to remember that it does not have to be intimidating, and that there are ways to participate outside of voting, which gets all of the attention here. And even the city council members who implemented participatory budgeting in New York, they're not used to the other parts. So they pay the most attention to the last part of the process of get out the vote, to get people to vote, and didn't pay as much attention to the first 9 months, which are much more interesting, of getting people to talk to each other and change each other's minds on their priorities. But the first year, there was one participating elected official who did not want youth to vote because his constituency was older. But they still let kids participate. And in the assemblies, the kids drew upon local or experiential knowledge to say, oh, this block feels unsafe in the after school hours, in ways that the city hall experts would not have known. And it impressed the adults in the room enough so that the voting age lowered every year until it went down to 11. Or if you're younger than 11, you can participate if you if you participate in the assembly. And also undocumented immigrants and others participated in that way. So there is that part that's interesting. And I'll also say that that even if it's organizing 20 people, it makes a difference. So some of the interesting spillover or ripple effects from PB were because it's were, for instance, school bathrooms. So many people got upset about it that they kept complaining. They were not out in the streets screaming, but enough people complained so that one year the Department of Education doubled its budget from 70 to 140 million just for elementary school bathrooms because of complaints from PB. That's bigger than the entire PB budget. So, and then another interesting project was making a subway metro station accessible with an elevator to folks with disabilities. And they said $100,000 to renovate the whole subway station. This PB grant is not going to be enough. But if we get this on the PB ballot and it wins PB funds, that means that it's a priority for the community and it has a lot of popular support. We are using it as a deposit and we want the city to kick in the rest. And they did, which cost a couple million. But so to me, it's like, when is it, again, a door or an entry point for more organizing and thinking together? And when is it just something that you pick as a Band-Aid that just ends there? Because we need more doors into politics for liberation.
Yes, totally. Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone in the room have any more additional question. If not, I'm gonna thank you a lot, Dr. Celina, because it was like a great way to know how we can implement this part of budgeting in our own communities and as scholars, how we can put this conversation in our everyday lives. So thank you for your kindness. Thank you for agreeing to do this event with us. And I share with all the discount of the book and also the link from Amazon if anyone in here are interested in buying the book. I start reading it and it's really good one, so I extremely recommend. So I don't know, Dr. Celina, if you want to say one last thing to all of us.
Oh, just that I feel very grateful for your attention. Paying attention on Zoom for an hour and a half is no joke. And just thank you for thinking with me. I know it's not so easy to interact in this way, but I'm very findable. If you look me up, you can find my email address, and I'd love to be in conversation with you. So yeah, I just feel very grateful to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you as well to the Dr. Sol Cárdenas. Thank you, doctor, because I know it was like a great work to read so fast and in a very short time, but thank you for all the commitment as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jacqueline, Carla, Sol. Wow, yeah. And all of the questions.
If you all can help us to open your cameras, because we're gonna take a screenshot to share it in our social media, I will be really relieved and happy to do so.